Hello, and I didn't come 100 million miles just to turn back at the last 10 feet. Welcome to Best of the Rest, the show where we take a second look at movies that were poorly received upon release and challenge ourselves to only talk about the things we like and what the movie does well. It's Mars Month, and this week we are talking the 2000 film Mission to Mars. My name is Chris Logan, and I am joined, as always, by the result of millions of years of evolution, Andrew Williams. All right, you ready for this one, Andrew?
I am.
What is your history with this movie, Mission to Mars? It's we talked about Red Planet last week, right? These come out the same year. They're forever linked. But I feel like both kind of faded into obscurity, unlike something like, Armageddon and Deep Impact, where there's the Shawn Michaels and the Margie Jannetty of the two. Like, both of these kind of disappeared. But this one seems to have a little bit more staying power, in particular for some of the bonkers swings the movie takes. But what is your history of the movie? Did you see it in theaters? Have you seen it before? Is it something that's maybe stuck with you?
Yeah, I remember seeing it. I think it was very similar to Red Planet, where I didn't see it in theaters, but we rented it when it came out. And because I kind of remember some bits at the ending, a little bit happening there. And as I was watching it, other scenes kind of started bleeding back in and just remind you that the human brain is terrifying. The things that may be buried in there versus the things that aren't. Yeah, I think this one has a little bit more staying power, if only because it was directed by Brian De Palma. Obviously, we'll talk about that a little bit more later, but obviously having a relatively A-list director on your film is going to make it stand out a little bit more. And I think that contributes to it. But yeah, this is not like an Armageddon, Deep Impact, or any of those others where both movies kind of fell off the... There's nobody that saw Red Planet and was like, oh, this is just a poor man's Mission to Mars, or vice versa. Nobody thought that. Nobody thinks that now. But I definitely had seen it before. Like I said, not in theaters for sure. I would have been 13, or about to be 13. So this might be a movie my parents went and saw. But I hadn't seen it in many, many years. Probably not since those original things. Very similar to Red Planet. So I was excited to go back and check this out, and especially learning that Brian De Palma directed it, and also learning that it is apparently based off of a ride.
I never realized that. I never put it together. I'm not a huge Disney World aficionado to know all the ride names or whatever, but yeah, you think Pirates of the Caribbean Haunted Mansion as being the first two attempts at them adapting the ride, but a few years before those, you had Mission to Mars. It had never occurred to me that it was based on a Disney ride. Yeah, very loosely, but still, it's essentially a Disney movie. They released it through Touchstone, and yeah, based on their attraction. So bizarre. I did see this movie in theaters. It's the one time I saw it before watching it this week. I remember seeing it in theaters and thinking it was so weird. It's one of those things that certain aspects stuck with me forever, while other aspects I completely forgot about. We'll talk about some of the stuff that stuck with me. I mean, there's this somewhat infamous exposition dump at the end of this movie that stuck with me forever. And I just remember thinking, probably my two biggest takeaways after seeing it was I remember when it was revealed there's an actual face on Mars. I'm like, that's what they went with, the people writing this movie. How there's kind of a face on Mars or the shadows, or what if it was actually a face that was left there? I was like, oh, that's what okay. And then the big exposition dump just stuck with me. Wow, that's what this movie was building towards, huh? Not even a hate or love it thing, just kind of being blown away that that's where this movie ended up. And I feel mostly the same way going back and revisiting it now. It's a movie that I didn't love or hate. It just kind of, I thought this is this curious thing, and I kind of feel that way now. I probably like it a little bit more now because it's such an ambitious swing at the end. And look, I'm an old man living at clouds. It's the kind of thing you see now, and like, wow, you don't see a lot of movies taking these kind of risks these days, or just not even a risk, just taking this kind of swing. Like it's just God. The end of this movie, I can't wait to talk about it. We're gonna talk about all the positives, everything we like about this film. #Positivity Podcast. It is what we do. But let's set the stage a little bit before we dive into it. This movie is released March 10th. In the year 2000, made on a budget of $100 million. That is a pretty big budget, especially for the year 2000. At the box office, however, it only brings in $111 million. Creeping over that production budget, definitely losing money overall. Critically, it's not well received. It holds just a 24% critic score on Rotten Tomatoes, so critics were not into it. Audiences showed up the first weekend and quickly dropped off, and the movie kind of fades into obscurity.
Yeah, even looking at the audience score here, it only goes up to 30%. So, and again, this is another one. This is 24% is based off 115 reviews. So this is not a small sample size. Like, I mean, I know we've looked at movies in the past that have literally 30 or 40 reviews. So very similar to Red Planet. We have a decent size. We have a decent sample size here for these reviews, and they're still not great. And like I said, in this case, in Red Planet, you at least had it was like a 14 to 28 step up. This is just 24 to 30. So we're pretty, 3 out of 10 people is about in line with who enjoyed this movie. Which once again is a reminder of how Rotten Tomatoes works. The percent score is the percent of positive reviews.
Not percent of goodness of the film.
Not percent of goodness. A 24% film is not an average of 2.4 out of 10. 24% film means 1 out of every 4 critics enjoyed it. So it doesn't actually mean that you enjoying it is all that strange. Enjoy enjoying it because 1 out of 4 critics agrees with you. Or don't care that the critics agrees with you. Don't. So I know it means a requirement. Just understand how the logic and the math actually works, please. I'm begging you. I can't keep having this conversation. Anyway, like you said, they showed up that first weekend, didn't really reappear. Like you said, vanishes pretty quickly. I remember it was, I think the first week that we were talking about Red Planet, I don't think we mentioned it on the show, but it opened 5th on its first weekend. And that's so awful, really, for a movie. Now this did first place its opening weekend, made $22 million, which is literally 2/3 of Red Planet's entire box office budget. So this movie definitely saw some more success. I don't know if it's to blame. Maybe Mission to Mars didn't do well, and so when Red Planet came out, we were like, we're not doing this again. We're like,
fool me once, Mars.
We're not going to Mars twice, not in 1 year. So yeah, it does. Anyway, Mission to Mars does really decent business that first weekend, 22 million. Drops that second weekend, and then by the third weekend, it's almost completely gone. So the audiences did not stick around. No word of mouth, no legs of any kind. Decent overseas, but like you said, we get that 110 million worldwide gross, and when you factor in marketing, theater takes, things like that, this is definitely a loss for the studio. Did not impress anyone when it came out, and there's not really been any reevaluation since.
Let's take a look at the creative team behind the film. It's written by the writing duo of Jim and John Thomas, as well as Graham Yost. Now, the Thomas brothers we have talked about before, alums of the show. They have credits on Predator 2 and Wild Wild West, both of which we have covered. As for Graham Yost, a lot of credits under their name. Speed and Broken Arrow, a couple of action movies from the 90s. I did notice that the first credit I found of theirs was writing for the TV show Hey Dude. Remember that show? Old Nickelodeon days?
I do. The Dude Ranch.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's also got a lot of uncredited screenwriting, a lot of, I think, script, punch-up work that Graham Yost has done. It's a name that I've seen. Probably one of the more recent things people know him for is the show Justified, which was developed by him, starring Timothy Olyphant. Was also an executive producer on the sequel series that just came out. Has also done work recently on the Silo series, based off the series of novels by Hugh Howey, of which I am a fan. So it's still out there doing his thing. And man, Speed is so good. That script is so great. It works so well.
Movie.
Speed is just fantastic. Also, ironically enough, a writer and supervising producer on From the Earth to the Moon, 2 years before Mission to Mars. I wonder if that's how he got the job. Who knows? But
what if you went a little bit farther?
But yeah, obviously Jim and John Thomas, like we said, no strangers to the show. They are actually writers on the first Predator as well as Predator 2. Tons of credits throughout their lives. A lot of stuff that just points back to Predator because they get creditor for the Predator. They get creditor.
They get creditor for the Predator.
They get credit for the Predator characters. Also wrote things like Executive Decision with Kurt Russell. And a bunch of other Predator fun character. Stuff. Oh man, I'm on fire today, folks.
Good one. Andrew, you mentioned this movie is directed by Brian De Palma. That is crazy. Brian De Palma holds an interesting spot because he's like an all-timer, right? Like an all-time great director. I mean, The Untouchables, Carrie, Scarface, First Mission Impossible. But he's in this weird space where he's not like the studios aren't like, oh, it's a Brian De Palma film, throw all the money at him. Like he still has to fight for projects and ends up on weird projects, and some of movies bomb and has to fight to get made. Like he just exists in this weird space. I would relate it to maybe like I think Wes Craven is kind of that way, or the director we're talking about next week is kind of that way, where it's like they're well known, have high profile films, but still sometimes struggle to get the high profile stuff or get a budget. But he's here, Mission to Mars, with a large budget, with an A-list cast. And it doesn't, on the surface, may not seem to line up with his other work, but we're watching this movie, like his fingerprints are all over it. His signature, I should say.
Brian De Palma is interesting. I think the biggest reduction in credits for him is very similar to somebody like Wes Craven. It's that the hits eventually got outweighed by the flops. It sucks, but pretty much every movie he makes after Mission Impossible is a flop of some kind or underperforms in some way. He makes Mission Impossible, which again, you would see at the offset, like that one's not as crazy just because he does like his weird, like got that weird voyeuristic style he works in. For a spy movie that works. But like he goes on with stuff like Mission to Mars, and then Black Dahlia. But like since Mission to Mars, he's only made 5 movies in the ensuing 19 years. So he's definitely like dropped off his production, but part of that I think is that he's just not getting a lot of offers. I think also part of it too is probably just general displeasure with the studio system, which is not uncommon for a lot of his contemporaries at this point.
He's also pretty old.
He's 82, yes. So I mean that means he was almost 60 when he made Mission to Mars. So so by that point I can definitely see somebody being like, you know what? I'm just going to rest and watch the sunrise on a grateful universe. But he's still got some great stuff in his filmography, some stuff that I do really love, like even just an early one he did called Phantom of the Paradise, which is an early kind of comedy horror musical thing. Obviously kind of taking some inspiration from Phantom of the Opera and even The Picture of Dorian Gray. And then obviously you get into like his kind of big works, like, and he's kind of split into 2 different camps where there's like his blockbuster stuff, like clearly the high budget stuff that was meant to be big successes. You can look at stuff like Mission Impossible, The Untouchables, even maybe something like Carrie. Those were all kind of meant to be like big hits with decent budgets. And then you've got this, like, he does things like Obsession. He does these like psychological thrillers that he loves, like Obsession, Dressed to Kill, Blowout, Body Double, things like that, where they're these kind of almost erotic thrillers at times. That's kind of, when I think of Brian De Palma, I tend to think more of those things because those are the things where he was kind of doing what he wanted to do. But then he would occasionally step back into to big studio stuff. I think that was part of just just part of how the game works for people. Sometimes, you make your big studio picture and then they're like, okay, you make this for us and then we'll give you the budget for this. Not uncommon practice. Harold Ramis, guy, very famously wrote Ghostbusters, Egon Spengler. He talked about how he ran into this problem a lot where he'd make a movie, it would do badly, and he'd kind of be in a place where he'd be kind of stuck, where they'd be like, well, your last movie didn't do good, so we're not really super interested in giving you anything else. And then I think he mentioned in the late 90s, he did Analyze This. He directed that, and that got him a whole bunch of goodwill again because it was a huge hit. So they were like, oh, well, we want you to do the sequel, then we'll let you do this. And it's a real give and take with some of these guys, especially directors in the 80s and 90s. It was really definitely a semblance of you are only as good as your last film. And if your last film wasn't a hit, anything going forward became a struggle because they were kind of like, well, your last movie didn't make us any money. Why should we give you more? And I can definitely understand being disillusioned with that relationship after a period of time. And it kind of feels like that's a little bit of where De Palma's at. And even the last movie he made, Domino, in 2019, which was a kind of a crime thriller with Nikolai Coster-Waldau from Game of Thrones, as well as the greatest actor of all time, Guy Pearce. De Palma said it was one of the worst sets he'd ever been on. So obviously, still not having a great time. So I definitely can see him kind of just sitting back and kind of just enjoying the time he has left at this point. He's not quite in "Don't Buy Green Bananas" territory yet, but he's getting there. But I do love a lot of his work. I think he's done some fantastic stuff. And like you said, it's very interesting watching this because at the offset, I'm like, this is not what I envisioned Brian De Palma. Even like after Mission Impossible, I would still like not be like, oh yeah, Brian De Palma should make a movie where we go to Mars. But then there's camera shots and there's the way they choose to frame certain scenes and all these things. And I was like, oh, this is De Palma all over it. This has his fingerprints with some of his slow tracking shots that he loves. We'll talk more about that with the scenes, but he definitely makes his presence felt here. And that makes it, I think at bare minimum, a more interesting watch than something like Red Planet, which I think is why maybe this one's a little bit more regarded.
Andrew, you mentioned Analyze This like 5 minutes ago. My family has some relatives of mine have a lake house that we would go up to every Thanksgiving growing up, and it's one of those things that had like there's an NES downstairs that I always played, had the same like 10 games, and then there was a VCR upstairs with like 5 VHSs, and Analyze This was one of them. And I always Analyze This and Analyze That. I always have trouble remembering which one's first and which one's second, but still, that's like an all-time great sequel title, right? Analyze This, what we can call the sequel. Analyze That. That's pretty good.
Pretty good.
That's one of like. Why isn't that one of the? Every time someone wants to mock a sequel name, they'll do the Too Fast, Too Serious, or Too Fast, Too Furious thing, or Electric Boogaloo. But I think Analyze That should be one of them. Like Breaking 2, Breaking That.
Yeah, it's a
That Fast, That Furious.
That Fast, That Furious. Analyze This, Analyze That. It's not very creative. It's one of those things that like,
you have to do it. You have to do it.
Yeah, you can't not do it. Like somebody writes it on a piece of paper, and I'm sure they're just like, oh God, we can't do this, and then they're kind of like, but we have to do this. Like we can't not do it, right? This is terrible. And so I don't know how that one gets lost. Probably because I don't know. I've seen Analyze This a couple of times. I've not seen Analyze That many times. I know it was not nearly the success of the first one, which is probably why. So,
what if the sequel to Taken was called Taken That?
It would have been great. The sequel to Taken should have been called Tooken, and I'm forever annoyed that it wasn't.
Toucan. What about that? Is that too far?
Shut up.
Take two. Take two. That's a good one.
Take it. Why not just Taken again? Still Taken. Just keep going with it.
I still have a set of skills. All right.
A particular set of skills. Yeah.
Today we're talking about
None of those movies.
Mission to that. Mission to Mars. 2000 film. Brian De Palma. It's a weird one. We're going to talk about it. All the best parts. All the positives. Are you ready, Andrew?
I am.
In the year 2020, the first manned mission to Mars lands on the red planet to begin the process of colonization. Shortly into their mission, however, a strange structure on the surface of the planet creates a lethal storm that wipes out most of the crew. A rescue mission is sent to check for survivors, but this mission features problems of its own. The surviving 4 members of the crews approach the structure once more and find a way to venture inside. Then some really wild stuff happens.
Yeah.
I don't know what else to say. That is, this movie is one thing up until them walking in there. And then, like, I don't think anybody watching the movie for the first time is, like, really prepared for what's going to happen next. It is wild. I can't think of another word to talk about it. We're going to dive into it when we talk about scenes. But, Andrew, you know what we got to do before that? We got to talk about this cast. Starting with the high point, the best casting, best performance of the film. Because every episode we recognize one person who goes above and beyond the call of duty, that they actually elevate the quality of the entire film with their performance. And we recognize that person by giving them the Mark Strong Award. So, Andrew, kick us off. Who is getting your Mark Strong Award for Mission to Mars?
It's actually quite an interesting cast, and I actually like quite a lot of what most of them are doing. But I'm going to be going to Don Cheadle as Luke Graham. I think I'm going with him as my Mark Strong. He plays obviously, we're kind of led to believe that all these people are friends going back, all their work with the space program, but he is the mission commander of the first mission to Mars that takes place towards the beginning of this film, who then the second mission, of which Gary Sinise is on, is sent to kind of investigate what happened to them. But he is in an interesting place throughout most of this movie. He's part of that original mission. He's there when everything goes wrong for them, and then is kind of that weird man in the wilderness by himself after they find him a year plus later, and find, they're shocked that he's still alive. But the part that he plays, having to kind of go back and forth from being the mission commander to running into all of these problems, the terror that they face, and then this kind of the reclamation they get when they bring him back, and kind of even following through on this mission. I think he does a good job of grounding all of that, and also kind of very much like Carrie-Anne Moss, the Red Planet, kind of being this anchor through the film in a lot of ways. I think he does a great job with that. Don Cheadle was 36 when this movie came out. He was the same age as me. Chris, I will never be a man.
And he had already had like a really long career. Like Don Cheadle, he's in like seemingly everything in the early 2000s and really starts getting elevated, getting more prominent roles. He's, MCU guy now. But dude's been around forever. I watched all of the Fresh Prince within the last year or two. He shows up there as one of Will Smith's old friends. He was in the Golden Girls. And there's a is it the Golden Girls or was it the spinoff?
It was the spinoff, Golden Palace.
There it is, Golden Palace. And that clip went around. It goes viral over a few years because it's some pretty sharp sort of observations on a race there. But that's Don Cheadle. It's a young Don Cheadle.
And he's in most of that show. He's in every episode. Like, he's not in one episode of Golden Palace. It's not like a guest star. He is one of the main characters. He's basically God, what's the actor's name? He's basically B. Arthur's replacement, because like the 3 come over from the previous show, but B. Arthur doesn't, and so he's basically like the 4th. Like, he's the straight man to the rest of the cast, basically. Girl. Yeah, he's
and what is that? 80s
though.
Or 90s?
It's so weird.
What year is the Golden Palace? Is it 80s still, or is that 90s?
That's 92 to 93. So
Amazing.
That's literally 8 years before this. It's even wild to think about. But yeah, you said he was on Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. He was on a whole bunch of stuff that were like bit parts, like Kill Street Blues, Night Court, L.A. Law, and then even starts showing up in movies in the 80s as well. Has a brief part in stuff like Meteor Man in the early 90s, and then just starts blowing up as the 90s kind of swing out. You got Volcano, another potential candidate for this show, I'm sure. Well, that was 3 years before this, where he was 33. Chris, I am never going to be a man. Then you get stuff like Out of Sight, Bulworth. Yeah, he starts blowing up as the late 90s come in, and then the early 2000s. He's just everywhere. And then you start getting all of his MCU stuff like that starts taking off, and even television stuff. He's been all over the place. He's everywhere. It's cool. Good.
And he's a Mark Strong Award winner, thanks to you, Andrew. It's a great pick. I mean, everybody, most of this cast up and down sort of has two parts. There's like the opening part where everyone's pretty standard. Something happens to them, and then they are changed in the second half. And he might be the most dramatic example of that, because there's that year of time of him being alone on Mars, where we don't see him. We don't know if he's alive. Then we see him, he said, almost like a wild man who hadn't been able to interact with another human for a year. So he might have the most dramatic change, physical change. His hair's all grown out. So yeah, he's working his ass off, and I think that is a great pick. My Mark Strong Award is going to go to someone else. I think this is a pretty solid cast, though. Another narrow scope, just like last week, but everyone's really dialed in. Someone that I found very effective in this movie, though, is Tim Robbins as Woody Blake. I think this is Tim Robbins, in the words of Sean William Scott, it's a good actor. There's this, in case you haven't seen Role Models, one of my favorite comedies ever, Paul Rudd is singing, serenading his love interest at the end of the movie, making up a song as he goes, and says, "We could be just like Susan Sarandon and Tim Robbins." And it cuts to Sean William Scott, who just goes, "Good actors." And then it goes back to the song. That little part, though, I somehow find a way to reference that on a regular basis. So there you go. Good actors. Yeah, Tim Robbins is a good actor. I mean, there's Shawshank Redemption, obviously, but I always think of like his weird supporting roles where he's like the eccentric guy. I think this is a good example. World of Worlds, he shows up and like steals the scene from Tom Cruise in that movie. Just when he pops up like that, it's great. And even though he kind of plays these weirdos, I still think of him as like this serious, prestige, classically trained actor. Just interesting guy, interesting roles, interesting presence. And here, I kind of mentioned everyone has these two parts, and he's mostly in that first part where he's like just like this normal guy, man on a mission, and he dies in this movie, and that sort of causes the change for his wife. So rather than him being two parts, he kind of just has this dramatic death scene that I think is very effective. And he plays the chummy, just one of the guys, we're good friends, go back a long way, goofball really well, comic relief a lot of the movie. But he plays the seriousness and gravity of the situation. Him just slowly realizing like the reality of what's happening is just, I find so effective. And it wouldn't work with a lesser actor, but luckily they have Tim Robbins, Mark Strong Award.
I think this is a great pick. He does really good. That scene you're talking about in particular is sold extremely well. Also, this dude loves his wife. Like, that's the one thing that like really comes through to me the whole time. This guy is way into his wife. And for some reason, I always like seeing that. I mean, not for some reason. I just enjoy seeing it in movies, especially because there's so many
people. For some reason.
I just like seeing happy couples in movies that don't have any problems until one of them dies brutally in space. But I just think it's. I always like when they add that ripple to it. Seen that in a couple of movies we've done, but like you said, he's kind of this. He's also he sells the friendship with Gary Sinise really well as well. You can feel that they have this friendship and that he's sticking up for him, and he gets him onto this second Mars mission because he knows he's an asset. But like you said, that scene where he kind of sees what's coming, you see like the reaction change in real time. And he ultimately makes a sacrifice to stop his wife from continuing to try to save him, and also ending up sacrificing herself. And It's very powerful, and like you said, Tim Robbins makes it all work.
And the lead of this movie is Gary Sinise as Jim McConnell.
I guess I should point out real quick, Tim Robbins, alum of the show, obviously, from episode 1.
Wow. Yeah, he is in Green Lantern. I remember, I'm pretty sure, wow, man, that's throwing it way back. Because I remember, like, it was shocking to me that he was the villain
in Green Lantern.
I think I said, like, on the episode, like, it's serious dramatic actor Tim Robbins as a silly comic book villain. Oh, he's not a villain in that movie, is he? He's like
he's
the
Hector
dad.
Hammond's dad, and he's
That's
still
right,
kind of like scummy, and he's still kind of a jerk. But like, you know, it's definitely that thing where like you're watching that movie and you're like, wait a second, Tim Robbins. Like, I remember when they announced Tim Robbins was in this, I was like, oh man, this must be great. There's no way Tim Robbins would be in a movie that wasn't amazing. And I was right.
As our first episode proves, you were right,
Yes,
Andrew.
I was right.
Wow, alum of the show, Tim Robbins. That's great. But we got Gary Sinise in the lead role here. Back as an astronaut, famously in Apollo 13, going back to space. I always wonder if it's weird when actors do this for a second time. If they're like, oh, I've been to space before in a movie. So, like, I know how to wear the suit. I know the science. I know the technology. I wonder how much of that translates from movie to movie. But Gary Sinise, I mean, he was everywhere in the 90s and early 2000s. Forrest Gump, obviously a lot of attention brought to him there. And it really just kind of interesting career and transitions to TV not too long after this. He's in one of the CSI shows. I forget which city, not too long after
New York.
But New York. I've always liked Gary Sinise. I think he has a unique look and presence and energy. There's no one quite like him, and he brings that here. He's a character, again, to kind of go back to everyone playing these two halves of a character after a dramatic event. His dramatic event happened before this movie starts. His wife died, and he is sort of a haunted man after that. And it's, you know, I remembered a lot about this movie. I remembered him being on the mission, and the beginning of the movie is all about him not going to Mars. And then, like, they launch, you know, Don Cheadle and his team go to Mars, and Gary Sinise isn't there. And I was like, I don't remember this. Wasn't he there? And then, obviously, a second mission has to go to Mars, and that's how he ends up there. But, yeah, he's anchoring the movie. I think he's doing a great job. Like I said, he's got that haunted presence throughout and sort of finds peace in an odd way at the end of this movie. It's weird. It's a weird thing.
It's weird
there, but I think Gary Sinise is doing a great job.
I think he is as well. I like I said, big fan. You know, obviously Forrest Gump, just that's probably everybody's general go-to, that in Apollo 13. I did not realize he was the Smithsonian narrator in Captain America: The Winter Soldier, but here we are.
That's interesting.
But yeah, he had the CSI run on television, also had a run on a Criminal Minds spinoff for a while, so still out there doing his thing. Also plays bass guitar in the Lieutenant Dan band, which is a thing I just learned exists. You know, us bass players got to stick together. But yeah, he's, like you said, you talk about characters having their halves of the movie. He's pretty static throughout this. His life-changing event happens before this movie begins. So you do get some glimpses into what he was like before when he was with his wife. And again, there was a dude who definitely loved his wife. And it makes it all the kind of more tragic for his character, because you see what he had and you see the message that she gave to him and why he still kind of believes in this stuff. And it makes the kind of standing up for him from Tim Robbins and all that work really well. So yeah, I definitely remember him in this movie. It definitely, like, I too was like, wait, why isn't he on this mission to Mars? And then I had to reframe it and be like, oh, I'm just not remembering this movie correctly. And so that was part of rewatching this movie, was definitely remembering what didn't ring true in my memory. But I think he does a great job. Like I said, the piece he finds at the end, I think like I said, it's weird. We'll talk about it, but he does a great job selling all of it.
Connie Nielsen plays Terry Fisher. This is Tim Robbins' character's wife. So in the first half, we have her as one of the crew, one of the gang. They obviously have all gone back a long way, been friends a long time, worked together a long time, and she loves her husband. I mean, they are a very loving couple, as you've said, and I like that they've got a sweet relationship. She is through a few scenes trying to get him to dance, and she wants to relax a little bit, and he's like, "Oh, I don't dance. Some couples dance. I don't dance. Just the one dance at our wedding." And it's not like a point of contention. It's not a fight. It's just this opposites attract type thing. And you just buy this relationship so well. And I guess we should have known, like, they were such a happy couple. We should have known one of them was going to die, and he does. And obviously, like, this sort of light goes out inside of her. She has such a warmth in the first half of that movie and so extroverted, and then can't really find joy in anything after he has died. I mean, understandably, just a huge loss. And so I think she flips that switch really well, plays both halves really well. It is a tragic story, but done very well by Connie Nielsen.
Yeah, I mean, she's, like I said, she's got kind of a lot of emotional lifting to do there, just because that pain is so something that she has to sell so readily and so visibly. Obviously, everybody is impacted by Woody's death, but she obviously has to bear the brunt of that. She does a great job with it. I remember her from a bunch of things. Obviously, Gladiator was a huge thing. She was in the same year as this. She was Lucilla in that. I remember her from 1 Hour Photo as well. Don't know if you remember that Robin Williams vehicle, Chris.
That's like the first time I could think of. Like, well, Robin Williams is kind of scary.
He's
and then he does
terrifying.
He does it like 10 more times after that.
Yeah, and it's always pretty unsettling. But I remember her from those, and she's back for the Gladiator sequel as well. And then obviously she played Queen Hippolyta in all the Wonder Woman stuff recently. So still out there, still doing her thing. And in here, no exception. She brings her A game to this performance, and it shows.
Jerry O'Connell plays Phil Oldmeyer in this movie as well. We don't see him until he's not part of that like bonding group in the first half, and then he shows up as part of the rescue mission. But Jerry O'Connell, talk about people that were everywhere in the 90s and early 2000s. He's certainly one of them. I was a big fan of the show Sliders, and just liked any time he popped up in a movie. I thought he brought a fun energy. Jerry Maguire, Kushlash, song I still sing on a regular basis. What a hit. But yeah, I like Jerry. I think he's funny. He's definitely the comic relief brought in here. Picks up that baton after Woody passes away, and he continues to be kind of like the funny guy. He's got a line towards the end of this movie. He's the one that's gonna pilot them off of Mars, and he's waiting to hear back from them, so he doesn't leave without them. And he knows he's got to go. And then whenever they finally get comms again, he's like, "I'm sorry, Phil isn't here right now. He left for Earth 5 minutes ago." That's something that's been burned into my brain for 23 years now. But yeah, Jerry Connell, a lot of fun.
Yeah, he's, I remember from a bunch of different things. Scream 2 is one that I definitely remember him from. And then he also kind of inherited the voice role of Superman for a good run of these DC animated films they've been doing. Did the role 7 or 8 times from 2015 to 2020. I think he does it through Justice League Dark Apocalypse War, which I think was meant to be the kind of final film of that DC animated universe. So took over the not so easy boots of Superman there, but been everywhere, all over the place. You look at his filmography, it's a who's who. He's been doing everything, but I think he's even on Star Trek Lower Decks now, so still out there doing his thing. But he's got the exact right energy he needs to be bringing to that role, kind of providing some levity, even with Woody. When Woody is still alive, he's still like operating in kind of a different space. Does a great job with it.
And Andrew, I mean, I would say those are our main players or survivors of each crew. There's some other bit parts, some people that don't make it very long in the movie that we can talk about when we talk about scenes, but I think it's time that we do just that. Talk about the scenes of this film, specifically our favorite scenes, starting with what we consider the best scene of the movie. So, Andrew, in your opinion, when is this rocket firing on all engines? I thought it had a good analogy
You
there.
lost it.
I lost it. But what's your favorite scene in the movie, Andrew?
I mean, it's got to be that Martian explanation, right? Like that's the wildest scene.
I guess it has to be.
Like,
I get
like
it
has to
almost
be. Like it's so weird and it's so strange, and the music clashes with it so strangely. But I do want to give a shout out to that real quick. Ennio Morricone does the music for this movie. Obviously, a massively iconic soundtrack composer. Did things like Sergio Leone's movies like Fistful of Dollars, Ecstasy of Gold from The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Probably one of the most iconic pieces of film score of all time. Continued working pretty much all the way up until his death. I think he did Hateful Eight was probably towards one of his last movies. But I mean that man was making soundtracks from the 1950s to the 2010s, and his music here it's very iconic and it's very good, but it does feel at odds with the subject matter sometimes. But I'm sure that was a choice. I create like a strange kind of ethereal sense even when we're kind of in those tense moments. But it definitely was jarring at times, and it's no exception during this sequence here. So the setup that we get this is that they find this face of Mars early on, and that's what kind of leads to Cheadle's original crew all dying and him barely surviving. And so when Gary Sinise and his team finally get there, they investigate it, and they crack the mystery of how to get into this thing. And they are then introduced to a visual representation of Martian history as guided to them by seemingly one of the Martians. So they literally, this giant stone metal face on the surface of Mars opens up, allows them to walk in, closes, and then they find out they can breathe inside, and then they are witness to this visual representation of Martian history. And it's just so wild and so weird. And like, it was something I was thinking about, but like, it was all just like, you wouldn't expect the movie to go this way, but it's like, but how do you expect any Mars movie to go, really? Like, it's really somewhere where, like, is there a place that a Mars movie is supposed to go? Because even Red Planet, nematodes wasn't on my bingo card. Like, it wasn't anywhere there. So, like, we're still going to these strange places, and I kind of realized that might be the allure of some of this stuff, is that you really can take it any direction you want to go. Like, and so in a lot of them, the reveal is that there is like some sort of Martian civilization. Maybe they're under the surface, maybe they're on the planet. Something like John Carter was obviously written before we could even see Mars. So it just was like, hey, there's people on Mars and we don't know it. Whereas with this, they tell us this story visually of how basically at some point in the past, a giant asteroid hit Mars and basically wiped out the surface foliage of the planet. The implication being that before that happened, Mars looked kind of a lot like Earth. Blue oceans, green land, sky, trees, breathable air, whatever you have. And then after this meteor hits, it becomes desolate and they leave, essentially, except for one little pod that launches itself down to Earth, right as Earth is in its development period. And this is all visually represented. They're like watching it happen while this music plays, and there's no narration. There's no voice speaking. The Martian doesn't try to communicate. It's very ethereal, very strange. And they start talking and are like, oh, at some point, Earth's development, there was a massive surge of life and they don't know how it happened. I have no idea if that's true. I don't know enough about the development of life on this planet to know if there was a period of time where life surged in a huge way and we're not sure why. If it is, great use of filling in a blank to tell a fictional story. Or is it fictional? Anyway, this whole sequence then culminates with Gary Sinise leaving to follow these people wherever they went. And it's just so weird. And I'm not saying that in a bad way, but it's just so weird how this all unfolds and how it all happens and how nonchalant they are all about it. Like, They literally
take
have
it in
aliens.
stride.
They have
Yeah.
an alien standing next to them. They're literally holding hands in a circle, and no one at any point is like, "This is friggin' weird, isn't it?" But anyway, it's done so strangely. There's a lot of really cool visuals here. And it's just, again, it's not at all where I thought the movie was going. But like you said, it ends up being this weird. It gives Gary Sinise this closure to a character that you kind of think wasn't really going to have any. Where, like, his belief is that, like, his wife is gone and he's kind of this kind of shell without her. Whereas with this, it's kind of letting him fulfill how she saw it. It's not just about getting to the next place. It's looking beyond that place to the next place. And this is him doing that. He's like, I've been on Mars, but now I can go to the next thing. But the idea that, there's not really much for me back there, but there might be something for me out there. And I think that is a very powerful way to look at it. I think it really works for that character and just leaves us on this very interesting note. And, people will be like, oh, well, what happened when he left? And I'll be like, doesn't matter what happened when he left. He's going there. That's the thing. He's going there. So it's all very cool. It all really works for me. And it's a very, very interesting climax to this movie. That is slightly contrasted with a more conventional, we got to get off this planet before this storm takes us out. And so we do get that little bit of tension there at the end as the rest of the crew goes back to the ship. And they get to see him leave. And I think it's all very, very cool.
It is cool. It is wild. It is so memorable because, like, up until now, it's all been about, like, this mystery. The strange force killed all these people. It seems hostile. What does it want? What does it mean? Who put it there? What's the secret? They finally get inside. And so it's like, what is the answer? What is this mystery? And they get in there. And in a span of, like, what is it, Andrew? Maybe 10 minutes is when we learn all this.
Yeah,
we learn that there used to be life on Mars. Mars was destroyed. Martians sent life to Earth, but also moved on to another planet. They're responsible for the entire evolution of life on this planet, and they left behind this thing on Mars. So when we evolved to the point we could reach Mars, we could answer this key and then go join our ancestors on another planet. And Gary Sinise decides to stay behind and do just that. It's wild. It is so much in a short amount of time, and it's presented in this like a museum display. Like you might see in a museum, like a big representation of the solar system and like these holograms playing out. And you see a Martian, you see what they look like. Like I assume that's also a hologram and not an actual alien, right? Does that? Because it kind of fades away at the end. I don't know. I remember when I saw it as a kid, I thought it was an actual alien, and I was like, yeah, it was like a CG looking alien, but looking at it now, I assume it's actually a hologram, so it's not such a big deal that it looks so CG, but it is a pretty traditional alien with a long head and like almond eyes. I mean, this movie is just pure sci-fi because you get to this finale and it's not like this relatable struggle. Like it doesn't really relate to anything we know. It's just like this pure sci-fi story about us discovering the history of life before and after Earth. It's just nothing in the movie up until then really prepared you for that. The most we have maybe is, you mentioned Gary Sinise's wife, Maggie is the character's name. Let's see, played by Kim Delaney, who appears in a few scenes just because he watches old like home videos.
Yeah.
And she has this pretty great speech about what you're talking about, Andrew, where she says like to stand on a new planet and look forward to the next one. And she's so passionate about it, and you tell that she really cares about it, and she seems open to the idea of other life, and no one calls her crazy for it, but it's clearly she's the one that's really believing in that or willing to believe in that. So he continues that mission for her at the end, and it's so weird. It happens so fast, and then literally it's over. Like they escape, heading back to Earth. The ship that Gary Sinise is on flies past them. And then, Don, I think it's Don Cheadle's character, he goes, "Have a great ride, Jim." And then it says "the end" on the screen. And it's like, wow.
Don, he can't hear you. I don't know.
Maybe he can. I don't know. It's weirder stuff happens.
Yeah, weird
like,
space technology. Who knows? But yeah.
Like for what it, like, to go up into that ship, this tube goes around Gary Sinise and it fills with liquid and he's holding his breath and he's worried like he's going to drown until he opens his mouth and realizes he can breathe for whatever reason. It's like, why does that even happen? I don't know. just some weird sci-fi stuff in this movie. It's a Martian technology. We're not supposed to understand it, man. It's and it gets so sentimental. Like, this movie is really sentimental from the beginning. Like, it opens with a big barbecue before they go on to this mission, and all the astronauts are there with their wives and their family and hanging out and really trying to stress to us that they're really good friends that go back a long way. I mean, they go through great lengths to really establish that. Literally at the end of this movie, Gary Sinise is reflecting on his life on Earth, and we got images of scenes we saw throughout the movie from the barbecue and from their Mars mission, scenes of his wife. And it's just so, like I said, sentimental about this strange sub 2-hour weird sci-fi movie from 2000, but it's got this like mythology built into it. And it's just, if nothing else, like I said in the beginning of this episode, I appreciate this swing. I appreciate like just, we're going to write this bonkers ass ending. And it's a great pick, Andrew, because this is far and away the most memorable scene from the movie. I think anybody who's seen it remembers it, whether they love it or hate it, they remember it. And I even friend of the show, my wife, I told her we were covering this movie, and she said the only thing I remember about that movie is there's this like hologram that shows the evolution of life. And it shows like a fish getting legs, walking on sea, becoming a buffalo. And then humans run into the screen chasing the buffalo. Where did the humans come from? And then like I watched it play back, and she's right. Like it shows the evolution to a buffalo, and then humans run on. It's like, wait a minute. It's almost like they didn't want to explicitly like deny God. They like left it open, like, well, maybe humans came from somewhere else, but that's obviously contradictory of us being ancestors of Martians. So I don't know why exactly they separate it like that, but it's such a specific thing that she remembered, and this the only thing she remembered from the entire movie. And she's right, it does do that. So shout out to friend of the show, my wife, for that observation. But yeah, it's a great pick, Andrew. Like, by default, I agree with you. Like, that has to be the pick. But I do want to highlight another scene. We talked about it already. It's Tim Robbins' slow, inevitable death. I think this just works so well. Because what happens is their ship gets blown in half. And so they have to hitch a ride on this supply refill thing that's, like, in orbit around Mars. Mm-hmm. So they all exit the spaceship. They're free floating in space, which, my God, that would be terrifying.
Terrifying.
Absolutely I can't even,
terrifying.
Literally can't imagine.
Because literally, this is what I think would happen.
Yeah, like if you miss this thing, you just float around in space until you die or into the atmosphere and burn up. It's scary. I wonder, do you think that fear, like floating above the Mars atmosphere, do you think the sensation would be similar to like extreme heights, like looking over a tall height and that feeling in your stomach? There's no gravity pulling you, but you're still so far away from a landmass that I wonder how similar the fear would be.
It's a great question. Because like, when I look out the window of an airplane, I don't think, oh man, I'm way high up. That's not the thought I have of like, because I'm not great with heights. I'm really, really not. And like,
yeah, same.
But like when I'm on a plane, it doesn't occur to me that I'm way high up, and
you just worry about the plane blowing up.
Right. It's led me to a theory of mine that the fear is not inherently of heights; it's of falling from that height. And like when you're on a plane flying above, like don't get me wrong, I realize there can be issues with the plane, but by and large, you're not going to fall out the window of the plane and just fall to the ground. That's not happening. But when I'm up on top of a ladder or when I'm up at a giant staircase, I can fall from those. And it can be terrifying. And it can be scary. And like windows are the same way. Like if it's really high up and I go to a window and I look out that window, I was like, that window can break and I'm going to fall. Like I realize that most of that fear I have is rooted in how deeply I think I can fall from that distance. Whereas if I'm secure, it's far less so.
That's interesting because like roller coasters are all about recreating that fear, and I think they're pretty effective. I mean, I like roller coasters.
Oh,
but, like,
yeah.
Even though you're strapped in and you clearly have confidence that nothing's going to fail, when you're at the top about to drop down, or when you start dropping down, you get that fear and that adrenaline. But if you're in, say, an elevated, what do you call it? Like a trolley system? Like I'm thinking of like the things like connect airport wings, like it's the same. You're on a rail, but you're in like a car, so you don't feel the air and the wind, and even though you're high up, you don't get that sensation,
right?
Like you do when you're on a roller coaster, where you're like exposed, or at least you have the sensation of being exposed, even though you're really safe. Yeah, that's interesting. I don't know what it'd feel like to float above space, believe it or not, but I just know it would be scary. I know that the fear would be the color red, though.
Yeah, that's the color of fear.
The color of fear.
That's why I can't look in the mirror, Chris. No, there's this. There was this building. It was like, I think it was the Chicago Fine Arts Building. They're getting rid of them now, but it was this. There's a bookstore I really like, and they would do book signings with like Gillian Flynn or Grady Hendrix, and they had manual elevators with operators in them. So it was like he controls where it's going and how it goes. One of the most terrifying experiences of my life.
Really?
I got into that elevator, and the first time I ever got in, the dude was like, "What floor?" And I was like, 10. And man, that dude had been doing it so long that he did it with like reckless abandon. It was like, it was fast, it was quick, and
he controls the speed of the elevator too?
Yeah. Like
Weird.
so like it got to the level, and then like he was not gentle with the stop either. Like it stopped, and like, so I'm standing in like the corner of this thing up against the wall. My eyes are like squeezed closed, and I'm just like, huh. And he finally gets there, and I'm like, I'm taking the stairs down. Don't even care.
It never dawned on me that an elevator operator is actually operating the elevator. I don't know. I guess I thought of it as like, I feel dumb now because it's so obvious, but I feel like it was like kind of like when planes first came out. You remember, Andrew? And it was like a luxury to fly, and people like dressed up, and like flight attendants was a little more glamorous than they are now. At least that's what the movies tell me. But I feel like elevators in like their infancy were like a fancy way to travel up a building, so there's an attendant to operate it for you, meaning push a button. I didn't think of them physically driving the elevator cart.
Yeah.
Huh. Today
I didn't either.
All right.
And they have to get rid of him, though, because apparently the only guy in the entire region of the country who services them is retiring.
And that's it.
That's it. They're done. They're done. Wow. They can't do it anymore. Well, like you'd literally, I think at this point they would have to fly in a specialist just to inspect them. And they're kind of like, well, and then like inspecting them is fine. But then like if they have a problem, you can't fly somebody in every time there's a problem. Like you can't do that. And so they're getting rid of them. I assume they'll just replace them with regular ones. But it was, I'm glad I got to do it. I'm glad it was an experience that I got to have. But whoa, terrifying. And then like both times I was like, down the stairs we go. Not messing with this on the way back down. Although the way back down probably would have been easy. But yeah, it was one of the most terrifying experiences of my life. Because like you're in this elevator, you're feeling the movement. And the whole time I'm just kind of like, and those floors, they're like 20-foot floors. So like even you'd see like, as you're going up, it's not like a solid door in front of you either. It's like the cage. And so you're seeing the floor get super, super far away from you every single floor you go up. And I was just like, man, this isn't what I want. This is not what I signed up for. So,
sounds terrifying. Thank you, Andrew.
Absolutely.
Almost as terrifying as flying through space and trying to intersect with a orbiting satellite. I know it's orbiting vessel, knowing it's your only chance that you're going to live. So Tim Robbins, Woody, his character is the one that he unstraps from the rest of them. He goes to intercept with this thing. He's got this tow cable, and he's got to hook it to him so they can all pull themselves in. And he does, but he's traveling so fast that after he hooks it, he himself slides off and continues to float through space, getting closer to the Mars atmosphere, which will kill him. From the moment that he flies off of the vessel, you know he's dead.
Yeah.
He knows he's dead. They all know he's dead. But the scene continues for like at least 5 more minutes as they are trying to come up with rescue solutions. What can we do? Do we have enough fuel to go get him and turn back? No, we don't. Can we try? Can we use the gun? And they are it, a lot of stuff plays out really well, and I'm high. I gave Tim Robbins the Mark Strong Award for a big portion for this scene, but I think Gary Sinise is doing a great job where he knows it's a lost cause, but he doesn't explicitly say it. He keeps hope. He's like, all right, Woody, we're going to get in here. We're going to sweep down and pick you up. And he knows it's not possible, but like, he's not going to let his wife accept the death. He's going to talk like they can do it. And they're all like, kind of have like this false hope that they know is false, but it is what it is. And, Woody is floating off to his death. And there's that moment of hope whenever his wife takes off to retrieve him. She doesn't have enough fuel to get to him, but she has like the grappling gun. So she can go as far as she can. She can shoot the gun. Woody himself finally gets a little bit of hope. He's like, yeah, come on. And the cable goes out. And like just a few feet away from him, hits its limit and bounces back. And it's not far enough. And like for sure. And even then she wants to try again, go a little bit farther. And Woody knows that his wife isn't going to give up on saving him, and she's going to die too, or other crew members are going to die by trying to retrieve her. So he says goodbye, and he takes off his helmet, killing himself so that she won't go after him any farther. And it's all
brutal.
So it's brutal, and it's so effective. And a commonality between a lot of space movies is, I said it earlier, like the machine goes wrong. We got to use our resources to solve this problem. And this is an example of them doing that and not being able to solve the problem. It hits really hard. And, it's a really, really well done.
I just watched The Martian last night because I was just in a Mars mood after Mission to Mars. And, that it just reminds me of that speech he gives at the end where he's kind of talking about Mars, and he says that that's what being an astronaut is. It's solving one problem at a time. You solve that problem, then you solve the next problem, then you solve the next problem. And if you solve enough problems, you get to come home. And in this case, they didn't solve enough problems. And it's the flip side of that kind of stance of fix this problem, then fix that thing, and then fix this thing, and that fix that thing. It's this, you didn't have the opportunity to do that. And it's the flip side of it. And it's sold extremely well. It's very brutal. Like, he opens his helmet on purpose so that you won't come after him. It's absolutely horrifying. And he's like you said, you see his transition and like his kind of, I've got it, I can do it, it's fine. But he, like you said, he's not able to overcome it. And it is unfortunate.
I can't help but see an astronaut in a movie take their helmet off, and they have like that hood that goes over with like just to cut out for their face. You know what I'm talking about, Andrew?
Yeah.
I can't help but see that and think of Buzz Lightyear. Like, forever because of Toy Story, that look is now more associated in my mind with the toy Buzz Lightyear than an actual astronaut. And like this dramatic scene of Woody's death, you see it, and then when they first arrive to rescue Don Cheadle, Gary Sinise finds his greenhouse and he takes off his helmet because he can breathe, and he looks like Buzz Lightyear, and then he gets attacked by Don Cheadle. But like it's always in the back of my mind when I see that look. Yeah,
I agree. We use those for work. They're called balaclavas, but I don't know if that's what they are for astronauts or not. But yeah,
it's called a space balaclava when they use it.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. But yeah, I do love that little scene. You see a little bit of De Palma's thriller horror instincts kicking in a little bit there, where Sinise is in this kind of greenhouse where he sees it's kind of been jerry-rigged to keep going. And you see he like moves his head to the side briefly, and you see Cheadle like wild and crazy standing behind him. And then he moves back and he's gone, and that tension in the music kind of ramps up. And then like Sinise looks in like a reflective surface. I don't know if it's just a mirror or whatever. And he sees like the hammer all raised up, and then he like flips around and they have their little standoff. And I was like, there we go. The De Palma leaking through a little bit more there with the way he's doing that.
We
mentioned, go ahead.
Can't help. I think we're all saying the same thing. Like, he can't help it. Like, in a good way, I'm glad. But like,
right.
When I watched this movie, I can't remember if I said this on mic already, but like, I didn't realize it was Brian De Palma until after the movie ended. And I saw it in the credits. I was like, oh, that makes a lot of sense because I kept noticing these things. Like in the beginning at the barbecue, there's these long oneers as we get introduced to these characters, and it's with this group of people at a table, then it tracks behind someone to this other group of people and tracks back. I mean, there's a few of those, and I'm like, man, they are like, this is just a very simple intro scene of us meeting the characters, learning their names, learning their relationships, and the camera is, I mean, you're making this production 10 times harder just by getting these shots, and they're cool and they're attractive, but like you're going so hard for this little scene, and it does that throughout. Like the camera work is like just quietly complicated, like it's not drawing a ton of attention to it. There's this shot on a space station where like we follow Jerry O'Connell walk down a hallway, and they're on the space station, and it's their orientation is changing. The entire set, I presume, is rotating, and he starts climbing up a ladder. Then like we pan over to Gary Sinise, who's in a totally different orientation, and like the amount of work that went into this little establishing shot is tremendous, and it's just quietly there in the movie. Like I said, it's not even like trying to heighten any specific thing. It's just he just can't help but be really adept at his shots.
Who would have thought? But yeah, it's definitely those tracking shots are definitely one of his signatures. I was watching Body Double, and it's the same kind of thing. There's these long segments where it's a single shot, and it's wild that he fits them in here. And like that barbecue sequence, like you said, the whole time I'm watching that, I was just like, I wonder if this will feel like a De Palma. Like, because I was looking at the wiki before I watched it, and I was like, oh, Brian De Palma. I was like, what? And then like I was like, I wonder if it's gonna feel like a De Palma, or if it's just going to kind of be one of those things he kind of just shows up for. And like that first scene, I was like, nope, here it is. This is it. Yep. Right off the bat. Not even a question. And then just obviously the big long tracking sequence in the space station. Because like it starts with like Jerry O'Connell and Gary Sinise next to each other. And then like Jerry O'Connell's walking as the thing turns. And Gary Sinise hypothetically rotates all the way around while Jerry O'Connell hits this and then like hits a ladder and goes across. And so like it's actually kind of an inverse of his normal favorite shot because it's a tracking shot technically that doesn't move. That's actually what's even kind of more impressive about it.
Everything else is moving.
Everything else is moving. It's like the camera is moving slightly, but the entire set is also moving. And it just creates for a really unique visual thing. And it's just very cool. And like you said, he doesn't have to go that hard, but he does. And I'm glad he does.
There's on the rescue mission, they run into a problem where they get struck by some, I guess, debris in space, including a hole getting punctured in the hull of the ship. And it, I don't think it goes through Jerry O'Connell's hand, but it rips his hand open and he starts bleeding in zero gravity. Here's my question, Andrew. The blood that floats through the air looks very CG because it is, and it's the year 2000. Then I kind of wondered, would blood look CG in zero gravity? If our blood was just a blob of blood floating through the air, you think it would look kind of fake?
I feel like it might. I was same in The Martian. There's a sequence where the guy has like droplets of water floating around, and it's clearly like CG. But I'm just like, but isn't that how that it would kind of look? Like it would look like this blob of water. I don't know. I guess we forgot to ask Buzz Aldrin to be on the show. So who knows? But,
we get to get like Buzz Aldrin, and that's like one question. In this movie, there's a blood. Is that accurate? And he just goes like, we never bled, so I don't know. Well, thanks for being on, Buzz.
Buzz Aldrin is one of my favorites because this moon landing denier confronted him in public once. Buzz Aldrin punched him in the face. It's one of the most satisfying. It's one of the most satisfying videos you could ever watch. If you really need to just see like instant karma, if you're having a bad day, just search Buzz Aldrin punch, and it's Buzz Aldrin. This dude gets right in his face, calls him a liar, calls him a cheat, calls him everything, and then Buzz Aldrin just finally. And this is like old man Buzz Aldrin. Like this is not young. Like Buzz Aldrin is not young in this video, and he full on punches the man with a force that I wouldn't want to witness or take on myself. So very fun. But yeah, I don't know. I have no idea what zero G fluids look like, Chris. So I guess we just have to go to space.
This scene where we should have filmed this or recorded this episode in space. That would have been.
We should have.
Next time.
Unfortunately. I mean, technically, Chris, we are recording this in space. Earth is in space.
Okay, Andrew. All right.
All right. Okay. All right. That's enough.
This scene where they are repairing the hole in the ship. There's a couple things I want to say about it. One, we talked about the score a bit already, but it's so weird. Like the music for this movie is good, but you said it earlier with the final scene, like it almost just doesn't fit with what's happening on screen. And I know we're a hashtag positivity podcast, and I'm not even necessarily trying to rag on the movie. I just think it's got to be a conscious decision, and it's got to be something to do with, like, you know, we're exploring Mars and other life, and the music's going to feel alien to us because it is very strange music. It's like synthesizers, but it doesn't feel 80s or anything. It's very weird. And during this intense scene where they're trying to patch this hole before they lose all their atmosphere, the music is just like weird alien noises. It's not like high tempo, heart pounding music you would expect here. It just seems so detached from what we're seeing. And I kept getting that feeling throughout the movie. I liked the music. Again, like I watched this movie, I watched it all the way through the credits just to hear the song that plays with the credits. I think it's really good. But it's very strange choices being made. And the other thing I want to say about this scene is I like that, Tim Robbins' character goes to the outside of the ship to find the hole and patch it. And to mark where the hole is, they have a pouch of Dr. Pepper that they squeeze out so it gets stuck through the hole so you can see it on the outside. And I'm curious how much Dr. Pepper paid to have that little product placement in there.
That and M&M's, man. Those were the two that definitely stood out to me. The M&M's are also very prominently featured. But yeah, that Dr. Pepper, I was just like, man, I can't imagine drinking space Dr. Pepper. Like, it can't be carbonated. So you really got to.
And you love Dr. Pepper.
That. Yeah, at the time, definitely.
At the time. You don't like Dr. Pepper anymore, Andrew?
It's a long story, Chris. We don't need to go through it today. We'll talk about it
one day. I'm sure you'll tell me. Okay.
One day, I'm sure. It's just not something Chris, can you imagine me telling that story on this podcast? That would be so boring. But yeah, I remember seeing that. It reminds me, like, there's definitely like one of the National Treasure movies, which I love. Don't misunderstand me. There's a moment where he's trying to get out of this gift shop, and he has the Declaration of Independence. But the person at the shop, because he's like hiding, but the person in the shop thinks it's one of the replicas that's on sale for like $34.99, and she asks him to pay for it, and he's like, $34.99 for this? It's a little expensive. But he like throws down all his money, and he doesn't have enough, and she finally goes, "We accept Visa," and it cuts to his wallet, and it's like the Visa logo prominently like up front featured, and I was like, yeah, they paid some money to get that one in there, definitely.
You know what other company paid some money, Andrew? Isuzu.
Yes.
The car company. Because in the beginning, again, this movie takes place in 2020. We're in the future, man. Which I think it's funny when movies are set in the future, but they only go forward 20 years. That doesn't seem that long. Like, you're going to date yourself pretty fast. But anyway, the movie takes place in 2020. At the very beginning, Gary Sinise drives up in a modern car. It's an Isuzu. Looks very metallic. Is electric, judging by the sounds of it. And then, like, Woody drives a classic car. He says combustion power is the only way or whatever. But it seems like he's the weird one for driving combustion engine in the year 2020. But yeah, Isuzu makes like a concept car for a 40-second scene in the beginning of this movie.
Yeah, because that's what you do. Apparently, that was weird. It's like this must be their idea of a future car, and it just looks like the Tesla Blade Runner truck they were going to do with no top.
It does, but it has like no top though. Yeah.
It's like a weird convertible. Also, I gotta say, it's so weird to me that the face of Mars was the basis of the story for this movie, because the whole concept there is that it's part of the Cydonia region of Mars, but the Viking 1 orbiter took a picture where it had this rock formation that appeared to have a face. It was shaded on one side, but you saw what clearly looked like an eye, part of a mouth, and even a nose on the other side. And so people for a while were just like, whoa, that's pretty crazy. But the minute they took a higher quality picture, the year after this came out, it's just rocks. Like, it's nothing. Like,
but
so
Andrew, it's covered in dirt at the beginning of this movie. Didn't you hear them? Like, we saw that, we just didn't know what we were seeing because it was covered in dirt. What's underneath those rocks is what I'm saying. Could be a big face.
It could be. You're correct. What's under the earth? It could be a big face. Who knows?
That's true. I did a quick Google while you were talking because after talking about this Isuzu car, I realized like I haven't seen an Isuzu vehicle in a long time.
Are they gone?
They stopped making passenger vehicles in the United States in 2009. So, yeah, they've
did not
the wrong
age well, folks.
Yeah.
So, and I was going to say, they didn't even try, like, in 2020 to be like, here's our Mission to Mars car. They didn't even...
The tie-in you've been waiting for.
The tie-in 20 years in the making. Oh, none of you saw it? Oh, that's our bad. That's our bad. We apologize.
Andrew, going into this movie, again, I hadn't seen it in a long time. I remembered mostly stuff about the end, and I don't read too much about the movies before I rewatch them, but I did see quickly that it was based on the Mission to Mars ride before watching the movie. And it was released through Touchstone. It's a Disney movie. I know it's not like rated G or nothing, but it's a Disney movie based on the ride. And the opening, like I said, is so sentimental, then kind of hokey, and like, all right, this is about the tone I'm expecting. And then Don Cheadle and his crew
brutally die.
The face. They send the radar in to try to map it. This big sandstorm comes out, and like they're like just recording. They're awfully calm about this giant tornado in front of them as they record it. And then this rock hits one of them in the face. I'm like, oh man, that was kind of brutal. But then that one dude gets picked up in the tornado and gets spun to death.
Yeah,
he gets
like
spun so fast his limbs get ripped off. I'm like, holy hell, I did not expect a freaking fatality level death scene in like the first 30 minutes of this movie. And I was like, that's where Gary Sinise comes in. He's got to replace all these dead guys. Like, I didn't not remember that happening, but it is
absolutely
brutal.
not. I did not.
I think the guy that gets killed, because like in that barbecue, we meet all the restaurants. Oh, what the hell?
All the restaurants?
I just said restaurants.
What was that? What was that? Restaurants?
In that barbecue, we meet all the astronauts. Look, they rhyme, all right?
Not even really. Oh my god. Oh wow. Oh man. That was good. That was real good.
Post credits. In that barbecue, we meet all the astronauts that are going on this mission, including this one guy who keeps like trying to pick up girls. He's like, yeah, I'm going to be in space. It's going to be nice and lonely up there. And like, that's his whole characterization. He's kind of, I guess, sleazy. I can't really tell you the character's name right now. Like they get to space and then it gets torn apart by the tornado. Like he just ends up being, it's a good swerve by the movie. Like the people you think are the main characters, die very, very quickly in very definitive, brutal fashion.
Yeah, I was actually quite shocked at because it's kind of like one gets hit in the face with a rock and it shatters her helmet, but you don't see like the damage. You just see John Cheadle be like, oh God. And then one of them gets kind of sucked into the sandworm, which we'll talk about that in a second because this is pretty gnarly. And then the other one, like you said, he gets sucked in and like spun around and like his limbs come off. And you're like, what in the heck? And then Don Cheadle gets like buried. It's like very kind of brutal. And I was like, whoa.
It reminded me of like the formation of the Fantastic Four and and Fant Four Stick. We're just going to go really hard on some body horror really fast on this planet.
Yeah. And so like the guy getting split apart into pieces, that was the one where I was like, oh, whoa. And so the genesis of this is they find like part of the face has been revealed and they see it, and the rest is still buried. And they send the radar, but the radar, it turns out, is the wrong message that this thing was wanting to receive. It is sending out this message, and the radar they send is not the proper response. So it sees it as a threat and it attacks them. And this literal like tornado sandworm forms, which is gnarly as heck. And that's what ends up swallowing two of the guys. But it creates this giant dust cloud that throws out the rocks, that kills the other character, and then buries Don Cheadle. He's just able to get out. Assumedly, he believes because it wants there to be somebody to survive to like carry on like the message of what this is. And but yeah, it's a brutal scene, really crazy. And so like you meet most of these people in the beginning scenes. Peter Outerbridge plays the Russian there. I remember him as the jerk from Cool Runnings on the Swiss team. Kevin Smith plays Nicholas Willis. He was the womanizer, attempted womanizer, and I believe is Jill Teed plays Renee Cote, who's the other one that passes. Yeah, but just gnarly stuff here. Crazy move there. It's a real bait and switch.
I gotta say, revisiting this movie, I don't know. I like it. Like, I don't know how else. Like, I'm not. It's just so weird. It's
so
just
weird.
so weird.
It's
but
so
like,
weird.
Aside from that weird ending, I think it is very effective at building this tension. Towards this, you always get the feeling there's this mystery to be uncovered, but we don't even know what that is until we get there, until we get the kind of puzzle of the sound that it's sending out. Otherwise, it's just like this rescue mission and this thing hanging over the movie where like we know that sandstorm wasn't natural, so something had to have caused it. But I think it builds tension well. I think Brian De Palma still rules at what he does. And it's goofy, that ending, but I appreciate it going there. I don't know. I liked it. I had a good time.
Yeah, it's a lot more auspicious than I expected it to be. Like, it takes some really big swings that I just really wasn't prepared for. Well, I mean, like, I was, because I remember that finale. But, like, the finale doesn't necessarily feel like the movie sets it up. Like you said, that whole explanation and climax of this film when they enter the face is, like, the last 10 minutes of the movie. So it's a lot coming at you right off the bat there. It's pretty wild, but I have a good time watching it. It was a really wild thing to watch. Just like I said, you see the little De Palma hints, because he comes onto this movie late. Like, the script's already written, the movie's already cast. Like, he kind of comes in last minute to kind of take this over. The previous director apparently had walked away, and he kind of comes in late stage to take this over. And it's still impressive that despite that, he was still able to kind of leave his fingerprints on it in such a big way.
Andrew, I had said earlier that Brian De Palma reminds me, he's in that class of directors that are well known, make high profile movies, but end up being kind of up and down in their career as far as the budgets they're given and projects they're able to make. And I feel like our director of our next movie, the last movie we're covering for Mars Month, which is John Carpenter's Ghost of Mars, is really the epitome of that type of director. I mean, I don't know, what's his earliest big hit? Halloween. And that isn't enough to really like break him into big time Hollywood films. He's sort of like almost always making what feels like large indie movies, whether it's Kurt Russell movies or, when he goes back to horror, like it always seems like he's struggling to get them made, but also that's kind of the charm of his movies. It's a weird space that he operated in.
Yeah, he gets, I guess Assault on Precinct 13 is probably his first like iconic movie. He does Dark Star before that, and he has a couple of short films earlier, but then he does Assault on Precinct 13. Then he has a script get made into a movie that he doesn't direct called Eyes of Laura Mars, and then that's the same year Halloween comes out. And then at that point, he's kind of like, Halloween gets him some cred there. So he gets The Fog, Escape from New York come out. He does reshoots on Halloween 2, The Thing. He literally does Halloween, The Fog, Escape from New York, and The Thing in a row, which is crazy to me that like one person just wrote those 4 movies in a row. Um, and then he does Christine, Starman, which is a bit more of like a approachable big budget type thing. And then we get stuff like Big Trouble Little China, Prince of Darkness, They Live. And this is kind of where the returns start to get a little bit more limited, when he starts getting into like Mouth of Madness, Village of the Damned, Escape from LA. And then the last kind of hurrah for his career, the last attempts, was Vampires in 98 and Ghosts of Mars in 01. He has directed 1 movie since then. He has done music for several movies now. This is actually something that he started doing a lot more often, is he will compose scores. He did the scores for the 3 of the Halloween, the new Halloween trilogy. He did some music for the Firestarter reboot, but overall he does run into that problem, but is seeing a bit of a resurgence now with the music side of things. Like I said, he's done the Halloween stuff. He's got another album of his own music from various films that he's releasing soon that's been re-recorded with his band. I actually saw him live in concerts 2016 or so. It was pretty awesome. The show was over at 9:00. Got home, got to go to bed on time. No issues whatsoever. I was really happy with it.
Great show. Ended in time for me to get.
It started at like 7. It was done at 9. I was like, man, can't they all be like this? Like, I get to go home. Awesome. I could get food on the way home. Not everything is closed. Yeah, he's definitely in that class of people who that influence and that success definitely wanes, and that causes them to just stop getting big, high-profile projects after a point, and even just projects in general. The last movie he makes is in 2010, and it's called The Ward, and yeah, it was a $10 million movie that only made $5 million. We'll talk more about John Carpenter next week, but yeah, he definitely fits into this aesthetic. I love him. He's one of my favorites. Have missed all my chances to meet him thus far, but that's another thing he started doing more is conventions. So hoping I get that signature on my Thing poster sooner versus later.
Well, I can't wait to jump into it. I personally have not seen Ghost of Mars, but I know it's not considered one of his classics, but it looks interesting to me, and I'm excited to dive into all of the positives and what works in that movie. We'll be doing that next week, but for now, it's time for our question of the week. And if you want to leave us a question for a future episode, you can do just that by joining our Discord. There's a link in the show notes. It's free to join. It's just a cool place for communities to get together and hang out, talk about nerdy stuff, and leave questions for this podcast. So this week, our question is from Mike Lynch, who says, "You've been chosen to lead a one-way expedition to Mars. NASA has allowed you to pick one person from the Mars movies you are covering this month as your co-pilot. You can either choose the character or the actor portraying them." Interesting question, Mike Lynch. Interesting that it's a one-way expedition to Mars. I don't know what we're doing once we get there. I assume we're colonizing it. That's kind of been the theme the past couple of movies. But who's going with us? It's very generous. You give us the choice to choose the character or the actor. Why would we choose the actor? That seems...
Yeah. I don't know. If the point is colonizing, I feel like I have to say I'm taking Liz with me, or otherwise I'm in trouble. But
I don't know if it's like you're going to be the Adam and Eve of Mars. I think it could mean that you're terraforming and doing the algae thing, or maybe there's a bunch of different expeditions going. You're one of many.
I'm taking two answers. I refuse to dedicate to one person.
Okay, all right.
All right. If it's about me getting to Mars and surviving on Mars after I get there, I'm taking Luke Graham from this movie because he survives on Mars for a year by himself. Clearly, he's got the skills to survive on Mars. If I'm going to Mars for other purposes, I'm taking Bowman from Red Planet. Final
That's
answer.
Carrie Ann Moss?
Yes.
Yes, okay. For other I was thinking Carrie Ann Moss too. Her actor, her character, not the actor. because they're very capable at fixing the ship. I mean, they're the ones doing most of the repairing in Red Planet, and I'm dropping your idea that we might be.
You said colonizing first.
That could mean a lot of different things, Andrew, and I wasn't trying to make it weird. But I was leaning
good
towards
job,
Carrie
you
Ann
did.
Moss anyway. Yeah, I mean, I think you nailed it. Those are definitely the most capable characters. I mean, going back to Mars Attacks, like, there's no one in that. I mean, we don't travel in space in that movie, so I don't want one of those little Martians with me, so I don't think I'm taking anybody there. We haven't talked Ghosts of Mars yet. I haven't seen it yet. Just kind of based on what I know about the movie. I don't know if there's any characters in that movie that I want on board this ship, but our past 2 episodes have been the ones about making an expedition to Mars specifically. And yeah, I think those are the 2 best answers. I'll say Bowman from Red Planet as my final answer. Just regardless of the question.
Great pick. Can't go wrong either way.
Great question, Mike Lynch. I'm curious if my answer will change after next week. We'll see if there's someone I would want to go on an expedition to Mars with in John Carpenter's Ghost of Mars. And if you've got any ideas, I mean, who do you want going to Mars with for whatever this Mars mission is? Let us know. Hit us up in that Discord. Again, there's a link in the show notes. You should be there if you aren't already. And until next week, until Ghosts of Mars, the final movie in Mars Month, just remember that maybe not every movie is great,
but all movies have greatness.
Thank you to Mars. Jesus Christ.
Thanks to Mars for being the subject of this month's episode.
Thank you, Mars. Without you. All right. Thank you to Mark Benavides for singing our theme song. You can check him out on Instagram at NotThatMarkAnthony. And thanks to Mitch for the music. You can follow him on Twitter at I'm the Biggie Boy. And check our show notes for the SoundCloud link. Check out our store on TeePublic for some Best of the Rest merch. And if you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend. It's the only way that we grow. And follow us on social media at BOTRcast. Thank you.